second Respiratory Care Interstate Compact review session. I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. We had great participation throughout this process, and we look forward to starting to wrap up our stakeholder review process with this informational session. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Carl Sims.
All right. Hi, everybody. Carl Sims. I'm a Deputy Program Director with the Council of State Governments and its National Center for Interstate Compacts. So really appreciate you all joining today's webinar. So we'll be going through and detailing the Respiratory Care Interstate Compact model legislation. But first, we're going to broadly talk about interstate compacts and as they pertain to the licensure policy space. So you're well informed before we get into the details of the compact. And then before we even do that, we're going to better acquaint ourselves to you and explain who we are at CSG. So the Council of State Governments is the nation's largest organization serving all three branches of state governments. We are nonpartisan and a nonprofit organization. We're there to provide policy assistance to states, to help convene states, help the sharing of those ideas and policy, so states have a better idea of those options available to them and knowing what works. We're also there to provide technical assistance specifically with interstate compacts. So within the Council of State Governments, we have the National Center for Interstate Compacts, of which Grant and I work. So in that center, we're there to help inform states about existing compacts. We're also there to help with the development of new compacts, as we are for this project. And then also for the in a small part of our work, also helping with the administration of some compacts as well. So our work as it pertains to today's topic is definitely in that licensure compact space of which we've been operating in for the past few years. And this work has been formalized in a contract that we have with the Department of Defense that was part of the National Defense Authorization Act to develop new occupational licensure compacts. So you might be familiar with some of those that have been established and operational, such as nursing and the one for physicians. But this was a new effort, knowing that compacts benefit military families, in addition to licensees that are seeking to work across state lines. Knowing that there's that benefit for military families, Department of Defense has an interest in seeing a greater number of these compacts available to states. So with that process and developing up to 10 new licensure compacts, there's an application process for professions to apply for technical assistance under this contract. AARC submitted an application on behalf of the profession to develop a compact for respiratory therapy. And that project began in October of 2023. So since then, we have been working in a stakeholder-driven process to develop the model legislation for that compact. And as part of this, having a stakeholder review. So there's a chance for you to see what's currently in that legislation before it becomes finalized. Next slide, please. So also want to talk about what is an interstate compact if you're otherwise unfamiliar. So you'll see our definition here at the top. Compact being a legal, authorized, legislatively enacted agreement between two or more states. So it essentially acts as a contract among states where they can properly address shared problems over those issues that states maintain sovereignty over. So a good example to think about for interstate compact that you're definitely familiar with is a driver's license. So your ability to use your driver's license from the state in which you reside and be able to use that license and still be able to drive across state lines and in any other state in our country is thanks to an interstate compact, where states, through a compact, agree to mutually recognize those licenses without you having to get a license in each state you want to drive in. So just one example to share there with interstate compacts, though they are all unique, of course, to the needs of that policy area and responsive to how states currently regulate that policy area. You'll see here some of the numbers behind interstate compacts and really the history of them. So compacts are not new inventions. They've been around since the origin of our country. At CSG, we've been tracking over 270 compacts that exist, and states are on average a member of 42 compacts. That ranges a bit. You'll see, 20 to 80 compacts, what we've seen across states, but that represents over 2,200 total compact enactments. So definitely not a new concept, and your state is currently a member of several of these compacts already. Again, they represent several different policy areas, really anywhere there's a need for states to better coordinate and cooperate on a certain policy area. So just throwing some examples out here outside of the licensure compact space, everything from transportation to higher education, emergency management, and natural resources. So on CSG's website and specifically our compacts page, we actually have a database that details all this. So if you're curious to know more, definitely check us out there to see what other compacts your state might be a part of. So as compacts apply themselves to occupational licensing. So there are three main policy objectives here that licensure compacts seek to achieve for states. So one, they're there to help facilitate multi-state practice to make it less burdensome and really also to maintain and even improve public health and safety, all doing so while preserving state authority over professional licensing. So recognizing that states each construct those licensing policies specific to their needs, still respecting things like scope of practice and the initial licensure process. So compacts are voluntary for those for states both to, of course, join them, and then also for a practitioner in a state that's a member of a compact, if they want to use that or not, is completely up to them as well. So states have been really responding to the availability of these licensure compacts. There are 17 currently out there and available for states to enact. And you can see here by the numbers that since 2016, that's really where these compacts have taken off in the licensure space. Over 350 pieces of enacted compact legislation have happened since then. And here looking at the state numbers, 51 states, including the territories and DC, have adopted at least one compact, and 42 states, again, including the territories and DC, have adopted at least 3 compacts. On our next slide here, you'll see a heat map showing the different levels of participation by state. So the states that are in the darker shade of blue here have more participation. You'll see the legend there at the top. So you can see a little bit of variability across the country about where states are currently at with this. Each state's going to be its own story as to why they haven't joined more of these compacts. So it's unique there, but just know that the more states join a compact, the value of compacts for the states that haven't joined increases. So it incentivizes them to do so. The more compacts join, because that provides access for more practitioners to practice in their state, and more states for their current licensed practitioners to access other markets and help out in other areas as well. Here is a list of the current licensure compacts that have been developed here. So you'll see also the corresponding enactment numbers, so showing the number of states that are currently members of those compacts. Those toward the top with the higher number are going to be older compacts on average, so more time for states to consider them through the legislative process and enact them. And then those towards the bottom are going to be the relatively newer compacts. So it is a multi-year process for those numbers to increase just because of the legislative process, and knowing that, as with most legislation that ultimately becomes enacted, it may take several sessions for it to do so. Those compacts that are in the gray list those that aren't active, so they haven't met their minimum threshold of states in order to start beginning work to become operational. A quick note on the model legislation too, just to make sure we're clear on this. So the compacts are created through model legislation. So that's what we're presenting on today, showing you a draft of that model legislation so far. Again, this serves as a contract between states, and for it to be a contract, the states need to adopt the same model language to maintain that nature of a contract here. So we take a good amount of time in the process to make sure that this legislation is stakeholder driven, so that we're representing the profession well, we're representing how states are currently regulating the profession as well, and there's consensus among states. So once it gets to the legislative process, it's already reflecting that work ahead of time. In the compact model legislation, it also details the requirements for a state to become a participating member. They can still enact the legislation, but there are certain requirements they must meet in order to be a participating member, as well as those individuals, those practitioners from a state that's passed the compact legislation, that criteria that they must do or complete in order to access that compact from their state. On the next slide, also want to just note why licensure compacts. So knowing that there are other portability policies that are out there, of course, the traditional licensure process. So what are the unique benefits that licensure compacts afford states and practitioners? So one, licensure compacts, they provide that uniform standards between compact member states. And this can have the effect of reducing the time, cost, and complexity for the practitioner when they're trying to pursue multi-state practice. So instead of having to resubmit paperwork that they've already submitted, to get licensed in the first place, in order to navigate the different policies, understand the differences from state to state. The compact makes that a uniform process. So they're going to the same location to apply for multi-state practice. It's a similar process, and there's a consistency that's afforded to them, also in the maintenance of those compact authorizations. So that can certainly reduce, again, the time, the cost for that practitioner. It's also helpful for the states themselves that they know, and not having to kind of navigate their own policies of, that another state's license must be substantially similar or equivalent to them, not having to do that potentially 49 other times, that the compact already does that ahead of time. Another unique feature of licensure compacts is they benefit not just those who are wishing to practice in a state, but also those currently licensed in a state that are wishing to access new markets or just work across state lines. So, with that bidirectional approach, normally portability policies are just benefiting those that are coming into a state rather than those wanting to practice outside of that state. And then there's some other efficiencies that compacts afford, such as with the renewal cycles of the compact authorization, typically synced to the renewal of the authorizing license, what got you into the compact. Things like continuing education that for compacts, not having to do additional CE requirements for those compact authorizations, just having to maintain your license that got you into the compact. And there could be an effect also of lower cost potentially. One from the above comment here about, potentially less cost from the application process, but also for the fee itself for that compact authorization, that we've seen from experience that those can be, equivalent to or maybe a little bit less than that of a license as well. So there's potential for there to be a little bit of a lower cost there as well. Just as there are benefits for licensure compacts, there are also limits on to what they're intended to do here. So first, licensure compacts aren't a one-size-fits-all. So we're not copying and pasting from other licensure compacts that come before them. These are crafted unique to the needs of a profession, of a state, reflecting how the profession is currently regulated. So there certainly are some provisions in the compact that are shared from other licensure compacts, that are more of the foundational, how these things operate, such as the commission, rulemaking abilities, and other various more of the boilerplate parts of it. But the parts that are unique to the profession, don't borrow too heavily from other professions, that they go through that process and obviously get in front of stakeholders as well to make sure that it truly reflects what their needs are and how they're currently operating. Again, licensure compacts are voluntary, so no practitioner is going to be required to join. They may not wish to join, or they may not be eligible to join. So it is completely voluntary. Also, compacts don't alter that state scope of practice or other licensure pathways. So if you're using the compact to practice in another state, you're having to abide by the scope of practice in the state which you're providing services in. So just as things are done now, that's not changed by the nature of the compact. So looking at the unique benefits to three different stakeholder groups here. So first, benefits to practitioners. So obviously they're benefiting from those reduced barriers to licensure portability that we talked about, but it also includes the availability of providing services through telepractice, through telehealth. It also, again, helps support specifically military members and their families, knowing that they relocate often, from permanent change of station orders, and other requirements as part of being in a military family. There are also benefits to licensing boards here. So as we stated, there's that agreement upon the uniform licensure requirements, which can assist them to not having to navigate themselves the differences in policies that vary across states. They're also getting access to a shared data system, which they're contributing licensee data to show who's eligible for the compact. But there's also the approach where they're better able to provide for public health and safety and better communicate with their fellow compact member states in the cases of adverse actions against a license or a compact privilege, or sharing things such as investigatory information as well. So there's a heightened level of public protection that's afforded to licensing boards with their participation. And again, they're retaining control of that scope of practice and their initial licensure process. And then for patients or consumers of services that represent from a licensure compact, they're benefiting from that enhanced public protection. It also helps them in cases such as continuity of care if they are relocating to a compact member state or their practitioner is, there is that greater chance that they can provide that continuity of care in a more streamlined and efficient manner thanks to a compact. Otherwise, it just expands the health availability of health care, and that includes telehealth as well. So here is our compact development process. No, this is a little wordy on screen here, but we really wanted to show you all those different steps that are needed from the origin of the development of the compact to once the compact is operational and then available for practitioners to be able to use it. So it is a lengthy road, but that's intentional. One, to make sure that, again, this model legislation truly represents how states are regulating the needs of the profession. There's that chance for stakeholder review that the public is able to comment on it. And that's all encompassed in phase one. And you'll see the highlighted portion about where we're at right now. Phase two being the legislative enactment. Of course, that's going to be a process with the legislative process for states to go through and enact the compact. And then phase three, once it reaches that activation threshold where enough states have adopted the compact for those terms to come into effect, that the compact commission will come into play and work to make the compact operational and make those applications available for practitioners to be able to apply for. For our stakeholder review process here, so just providing the highlights here. So again, this is the draft of the compact that we're circulating for public comment. This is the second of two virtual meetings that we're holding for the public. But we also have a survey available to collect comments and feedback in addition to any comments that we might receive during the course of this webinar. And what we'll be doing with these comments, these questions, this feedback is bring this back before our document team. So the document team is going to be the group of stakeholders representing those from licensing boards, those from the profession who have helped craft the document, as well as those from our technical assistance group. Another group, again, a broader group of stakeholders from the profession, from the regulatory community, to view these comments, these questions, and then make changes to the compact as needed here. So once that's done, the compact will then be finalized and then available for states for their consideration and enactment. All right, next we're going to go on to detailing the RCIC compact and really talking about how it works. And then we'll finish up by going through section by section and looking at the actual model legislation here. But first, just a kind of overview how it works and starting with some commonly used terms that you'll be seeing in that section by section review, but also in our presentation of the broadly how things work here. So first, you'll hear us say home state license. So just know that in order to access the compact, a respiratory therapist will have to have a license in a compact member state of which they reside here. So that's what we call the home state license. That's your ticket that gets you into the compact. The member state just being any state that's enacted the compact and has been admitted to the commission according to the rules and the legislation. So that can include your home state, but any other state that you may wish to practice in. That would be, in this case, a remote state to you. So from your home state, you'll be applying for a privilege to practice in each remote state that's a member of the compact that you wish to provide services in. The compact privilege to practice on the next slide here, that is what we call the authorization granted through the compact to allow a licensee to practice. So equivalent to a license in the benefits it provides, but distinct in the terminology we used via the compact here. So compact privilege to practice are synonymous terms. And then lastly, the Compact Commission, which we've already referred to, that is the governmental agency that's created through the compact that's comprised of the compact member states. And the delegates from those compact member states being members from the licensing board, be it members or administrators of it, are the ones that govern the compact per its terms. Their duties and responsibilities are narrowly confined to what's in legislation. So here we have the overview of how that process works, how someone can use the compact from a practitioner's standpoint here. So again, first, the respiratory therapist must be licensed in a compact member state of which they reside, that home state license. There are certain conditions that the respiratory therapist must meet, such as having an active unencumbered license. There's other criteria that's detailed in the compact, again, which we'll go over in Grant's section here. But the respiratory therapist, being that they meet those conditions, they're from that compact member state that they reside in, they would apply for compact privilege in each remote state they want to provide services in. But they do that through the same venue, being the Compact Commission and the Compact Commission's website, where from the data submitted by compact member states, the Compact Commission and its data system will verify that information, and on behalf of the compact member state and from the compact member state's authorization, provide that privilege of practice once that practitioner has been verified, fees paid for, and potentially complete any jurisprudence requirements if required by the state they're wishing to provide services in. So the compact privilege would then be issued, and the respiratory therapist would have the legal authorization to provide services in that state. On the next slide, you'll see here just a basic graphic of what that could look like. So say you live in Alabama, you have a license there to practice respiratory therapy, and Alabama's joined the compact. And then these 4 states below you have also joined the compact. Now, in this case, the Alabama RT would have the availability to apply for each compact member state here, and then receive those individual and unique compact privileges to practice in those states. A quick word on credentials. So knowing that states vary a little bit on their minimum requiremements for licensure as it pertains to the MBRC credential, knowing that some states have a CRT as the minimum, and then a handful of states have the RRT as the minimum. How that would work for the compact is that if you have a home state licensure, again, in a compact member state and reside there and have a license to practice respiratory therapy, you'd be able to access any state that has a CRT credential as the minimum standard for licensure. If you have a RRT, you may obtain a privileged practice in any member state that has RRT as the minimum standard. So that way, you're practicing at the ground floor of where your credential lies, as applies to the licensure standards of the state that you're practicing in. So again, simply put, that if you have a CRT credential, you can apply in any CRT state, but can't practice in the RRT states at the minimum. If you have an RRT credential, you can practice in any compact member state. Next, we're going to take a quick look at a couple different scenarios that might apply themselves to adverse action. So what happens when a state takes action or opens up investigatory or investigation on a licensee? So again, say that someone is from Alabama, all these being compact member states, and through their home state license have applied for compact privileges from the states listed below here. So say something were to happen in this case, Alaska, and Alaska chose to revoke the compact privilege. Well, that could mean that that practitioner could also lose their ability to practice in each of these other states, or they could maintain them. So that information is then reported through the data system to these compact member states. So they're able to assess it, take a look at the action that Alaska took, and decide for themselves, do we want to also take similar action and revoke the compact privilege or not, based on our own state's laws and regulations? So if Arizona, they would have the potential to revoke or maintain privileges. Same thing with Arkansas, California. The only exception really to how the scenario would work would be if Alabama were to take action. So on the next slide, you'll see here that if Alabama were to revoke the license, that would automatically revoke the compact privileges granted in other states. And that's because the license is being used to access the compact in the first place. So that RT is no longer able to meet the basic requirements to access the compact. Okay, next I'll turn it over to Grant, and he'll go through the compact, this section by section review.
Thanks, Carl. And while I'm switching over my screens there, I wanted to send a reminder to everybody that we'll have a question and answer section at the end of this presentation. And if you all have any questions you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and throw those in the chat, or wait to ask that on the call later after the presentation. But Carl will make a point to get everybody's questions, answer as many questions as possible in the chat. So, okay. Everybody, let's see. Everybody see my screen there? You see, Carl?
Yeah, I can see it.
Thanks.
Maybe you want to make it a little bit bigger just in case someone's looking at a smaller screen or laptop.
Okay. All right. So the compact starts off with section 1, which is title and purpose statement. This isn't typically binding language when a state enacts a compact, but here you can see it outlines the purpose of the compact and some of the objectives that the compact seeks to achieve. Moving on with section 2, the definition section. Carl touched on some of the major definitions in earlier in the presentation. You see, the document team really emphasizes trying to match up these definitions with typical definitions so they could coincide with your state regulatory statutes. A number of these definitions are going to match up with that well, and that's primarily the intention with these. So the real core of the compact language starts here in section 3 with state participation in the compact. This lays out the requirements for a state to have in place in order to become a member state. By having these in place, we ensure that the compact member states are allowing in qualified respiratory therapists that can in turn obtain compact privileges and practice in other states. So this gives the assurance to states that these practitioners will be qualified to come in. Going through some of the initial requirements in section 3A, the state has to enact this compact language. It's not materially different from this model compact. Number 2, they have to license respiratory therapists. That's just having a structure in place to license respiratory therapy practice, and also have a mechanism in place for receiving and investigating complaints against the licensees. So just typically when states have their typical licensure structure in place, that should satisfy those requirements. And 3, a compact specific requirement is participating in the commission's data system. That data system, which we'll touch on a little bit later, is what facilitates interstate licensure data. And that helps reassure states and gives them that kind of instantaneous information on if an individual is qualified. And number 5, another compact specific requirement, they must notify the commission in compliance with the terms of this compact of any adverse action against the licensee or license. That information is facilitated through the data system, which we touched on earlier. So licensing boards will have that information on individuals who are eligible to obtain a compact privilege. 6, they must comply with the rules of the commission. We'll touch on rulemaking a little bit later. They must require an applicant to hold a credential from the National Board for Respiratory Care as a requirement for respiratory therapist licensure. This is a requirement to help ensure that individuals do have that credential from NBRC prior to being able to obtain compact privileges. So assures that will be in place. Number 8, they must grant a compact privilege holder to a holder of an active home state license. That's a requirement that they do issue privileges to those who are eligible. And they must complete a criminal background check for each new licensee at the time of initial licensure. This is a requirement that states that requirement must be in place for anyone who wants to obtain a home state license in that state. And then that wraps up primarily our 9 requirements for a state to have in place in order to enact the compact and be a compact member. You see there in B there, just another note that nothing in this compact prohibits a member state from charging a fee for granting compact privileges. So ensuring that member state licensing boards are able to charge fees for those privileges. Moving on to section 4, these are a little different than the state requirements. Even though some of these will look similar, these are the requirements that a practicing respiratory therapist must meet in order to obtain a compact privilege. They must hold an active home state license as a respiratory therapist. It must hold an entry to practice credential. This requirement was in there earlier, but an individual must hold an entry to practice credential from the National Board for Respiratory Care. And the caveat here in 4 that's not in 3 is one that would qualify them for licensure in the remote state in which they are seeking the privilege. This reinforces what Carl was talking about earlier with the CRT-RRT difference, in that we know that there are many states that have CRT as the entry minimum to practice, become a respiratory therapist or respiratory care practitioner. But many states have the RRT as that entry to practice requirement. And this also allows for states to have the flexibility to change their entry to practice requirement if they so choose. And the compact will meet that and allow them to do that while empowering them to choose whether or not if the CRT or RRT would be their entry to standard, and that coincides with the compact. Individual must have not had any adverse action against a license within the previous 2 years to obtain a compact privilege. They must also notify the commission through their application that they are seeking the compact privilege within a remote state. They must pay any applicable fees, including state fee and renewal fees for the privilege. Must meet any jurisprudence requirements that are established by the member state in which they're seeking a privilege. Those are typically what we've heard are maybe known as law and rules exams in your state. So if you have those in place in your state, that will be maintained. So anyone trying to seek a privilege will still have to take that jurisprudence exam or law and rule exam, whatever it's referred to. Number 7, they must report to the commission any adverse actions, a self-reporting requirement, so that stays maintained through the commission's data system and accessible to the member states. They must report their address, mainly for administrative purposes, and then consent to accept service by mail. Moving on out of the requirements to obtain a compact privilege, a few more notes here on the privilege. Here in statute, the privilege is valid until the expiration date or the revocation of the home state license unless that's terminated pursuant to an adverse action. So that renewal process will coincide, compact privileges renewal process will coincide with the home state license they have. And then, as Carl mentioned earlier, if any action is taken against that home state license, the individual will lose their compact privileges in the remote state. A licensee providing respiratory therapy in a remote state under the compact privileges must shall function within the scope of practice that's authorized by that remote state. So if an individual has a home state license in one state but wishes to practice in another, they can do that, but they must abide by the scope of practice in the state in which they are practicing. And I know a lot of times, typically, that could be known as where the patient is located for telehealth instances. In D here, it talks about removal of a compact privilege. If a compact privilege in a remote state is revoked, that individual loses the ability to practice in that state until it is no longer limited or restricted. On a different note, so that was, if a remote state wishes to take action, if a home state wishes to take action, the licensee will lose all of their compact privileges that they have in any remote state until that license is no longer encumbered and 2 years have elapsed from the date of that adverse action. They must also meet the requirements of up here again on 4A to be able to reinstate that compact privilege. All right, in Section 5, we reference benefits for active military members, their spouses, and due to military families' needs for increased portability. The provision in here that an individual that is an active military member or their spouse of an active military member can designate their home state as a home of record, a permanent change of station, or a state of current residence if it's different than 1 or 2. And they also shall not be required to pay the commission for a compact privilege fee. So they'll be excluded from the privilege fee, but remote states can still determine what the fee for active military members and their spouses is. We know different states have different provisions on how they charge fees to military members and their spouses. So in Section 6, move on to discuss adverse actions. A member state has the authority to impose an adverse action against their home state license, so that preserves that right through the compact. A member state can take adverse action based on investigative information of a remote state. So if an individual who has a privilege in another state performs an action, which could be also an illegal action in another remote state, that state can look at that investigative information and make a determination if that warrants removal of a privilege from that state. That could also be eligible for the home state license. Nothing overrides a member state's ability to have a practitioner participate in an alternative program in lieu of adverse action, so preserves the ability of the state to do that. Remote state, listing out a few authorities of the remote state. They can take adverse action against the compact privilege, as we mentioned before. They may issue subpoenas for maybe issued by the Respiratory Therapy Licensing Board. Recover costs of investigations. And then here on 4, I want to talk a little bit about the ability of member states to issue subpoenas and gather evidence for action, which is legal in the state. So 4 and 5 here protect the ability of the respiratory therapist to take action in a state which may not be legal in another compact member state. So if an individual performs action in one state that's legal and maybe it's not legal in another state, that state which the practitioner was not in cannot take action or issue subpoena to gather evidence of that action. Joint investigations. Member states can join in joint investigations to investigate individuals who may have had violations in that member state, and violations which could coincide with other member states. And then here on F, just reiterating that point, and no member state can take adverse action or any other disciplinary action against a licensee for conduct or practice that was legal in the member state at the time it was undertaken. So I'm going to run through that. That's really a lot of the profession-specific sections within the compact. These remaining sections we refer to as our boilerplate language, which is fairly consistent amongst other licensure compacts, but I want to point out just a few differences on these remaining sections. One of the major ones is the establishment of the commission. So as we mentioned earlier, this compact forms a commission which will govern and oversee the compact. It doesn't have any authority over single state licensure, but does facilitate and govern practice through the compact, interstate practice through the compact. So a few points here. Each state, one state, one vote, one delegate. And for each member state, they appoint a delegate. And then laying out a few of the abilities of the commission there. I want to touch on the makeup of the delegate. It says here in section B2 that a delegate shall be an administrator or the designated staff member of a member state's respiratory therapy licensing authority. So the licensing authority will make that appointment there. Laying out a few powers of the commission. Here in C, so long list there. The commission will make up an executive committee, which lays out the powers there of that group, consisting of 9 members. There are 2, and then the compact allows for 2 ex officio non-voting members. Ex officio meaning they won't have voting rights, but have the ability to advise. And just to note, typically with other licensure compacts, that's going to be long-standing groups or organizations which are associated with the profession. Laying out the ability to remove a commissioner if need be. Reporting requirements back to the states. Touching here on public notice. There's extensive public notice requirements which should coincide or meet the requirements what's typical in each of the states for open meeting requirements. And the position for closed meetings and financing of the commission, qualified immunity for individuals with the commission. And here we'll get into Section 8, which we touched on a little bit earlier, was the data system, which facilitates that interstate licensure by sharing the data, sharing who is eligible to obtain a compact privilege. Member state licensing boards are able to see in real time if an individual who applies for a privilege is indeed eligible for that privilege. This is what expedites that application process, facilitated through the data system. Here on rulemaking, the Compact Commission will have the authority to make rules, which allows for flexibility of the Commission to expand upon rules and laws which are here in the Compact. One major note here is that the Commission has no ability to promulgate rules. Although those rules do have the force and effect of law, the Commission has no ability to promulgate rules which go beyond the scope of the Compact, which is solely around interstate practice, which is facilitated through the Compact. So the Commission has no ability to promulgate rules which could impact single state licensure or scope of practice or anything like that. When the Commission proposes rules, these coincide with some of the strictest rulemaking transparency requirements that we see states have throughout the country. The rules typically have a 30-day requirement to be posted and allow for public comment there. There's emergency rulemaking processes, which again are constricted to the scope of the Compact and have strict review requirements as well. And then, these last few sections touch on just a few more points and administrative details, states in default. The effective date of the Compact is this is when the Commission can be stood up and begin working. And that'll take effect on the enactment of the first 7 member states. So once the Compact's been enacted in 7 states, the Commission will be active and can start beginning their work. And just to wrap up, a few more bits of legal language in our boilerplate language, and then at the end, just another provision here saying that the Compact will have no impact on initial licensure. Okay, so with that, I'm going to transition us back into our presentation. Think on a few more points here we wanted to cover. And thanks for everyone posting their questions, and keep those coming. We'll get to our question and answer section soon. So just to summarize a few of the key provisions. Section 3 lists the requirements for states to join as a Compact member state. These requirements include requiring an FBI criminal background check and requiring an MBRC credential for initial licensure. In Section 4, it lists the requirements for an individual to obtain a Compact privilege and outlines procedures for privilege removal and reissuance. Section 6 provides authority to member states to discipline licensees, outlines procedures for joint investigations, and then, as we mentioned, protecting the ability of individuals to abide by the scope of practice and the laws and rules which are in the state in which they're practicing. Section 7 establishes the Commission, which is the joint the Commission of licensing authorities, which oversee the Compact. Outlines open commission meeting requirements. Section 8 touches on the data system, which facilitates interstate licensure for member state licensing boards. And then sections 9 through 13, a few of the high points there on our boilerplate sections. They provide rulemaking procedures for the Commission and then set the activation threshold of 7 states before the Commission can begin their work. So with all of this being said and all this work done, it has to go through, the Compact still needs to be enacted in states in order for the Commission to be stood up, as we mentioned, the activation threshold of 7 states. My legislation itself will need to be enacted in state legislatures before the compact's enacted. We anticipate the language should be finalized by the fall of this year and can begin to be introduced in states in the beginning of state sessions in 2025. And then once RCIC is activated, the commission will be formed and can begin the process of setting up the data system, which will lead to the issuance of compact privileges. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being on today, and encourage everyone to take part in our stakeholder survey. We'll send this out to everyone who registered today, but you can see the survey on our website. Want to note that this language that we went over is not finalized yet, and the working groups will reconvene throughout the rest of this year and the fall to finalize that language. And a big part of what's going to be considered is your all's feedback. So I encourage everyone to check out the website that's linked here and fill out the survey questionnaire with your thoughts. So real quick before we get into the questions and answers section, I just want to list some contact information there for Carl and myself. So and then the link to our website there at the bottom if anybody wants to check that out. So before we get into questions, we have some frequently asked questions I want to go ahead and touch on before we get there. These are pretty typical questions we get on other compacts as well. So do I have to be licensed in my home state to join the compact? The answer is yes. To participate in the compact, the respiratory therapist must hold a license that's issued by their home state. Compact defines that as the primary domicile. And a license from a home state that from another state other than the home state does not qualify one to participate in the compact. How much will the compact privilege cost? The compact member states and the commission will each set up a fee structure. So there'll be a fee from that member state, which is typically lower than the cost of an initial license. And all in all, that's with each of the fees, both the commission and the compact member state fee, it's typically equivalent or less than the fee for a license. As we mentioned, the Respiratory Care Interstate Compact will have no impact on the state's requirements for initial license or license renewal. Compact provides an alternative optional pathway to obtain a compact privilege, so and the ability to practice in a member state. So this will not have any impact on scope of practice or initial licensure requirements. What's the difference from existing licensure portability laws like universal licensure recognition, which you may have in your state and could even facilitate respiratory therapy licensure now? Unlike universal licensure recognition, compacts reduce barriers by practicing to practicing in multiple states and provide for a two-way reciprocity instead of just making it easier for out-of-state practitioners to become licensed. So essentially, if you live in a state and that state enacts universal licensure recognition, if you're just licensed in that state, that does honestly very little for you, as it just enables practitioners to come within that state. With enactment of the compact, that can facilitate licensure for you yourself to be in that state, but then obtain privileges to practice in another state. Does the licensee need to complete CE in every state in which they practice? And the answer is no. They just must complete the continuing education requirements to maintain their home state license. So any CEs are required to maintain their home state license, which is punches their ticket to the compact and to obtain privileges. That's what they must maintain and do not need to complete any continuing education requirements in remote states. And those privileges will be renewed upon renewal of the home state license and corresponding with the continuing education requirements. Okay, and with that, I know Carl's been answering a few questions we've gotten in the chat, but I want to open it up to see if anybody has any questions here for the group. So if anybody wants to use the hand raise function, or unmute your mic, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Yeah, I got a hand raise from Ellen.
Hi, I'm from Maryland and we're part of the Physician Compact. One of the things that the Physician Compact does in addition to initial licensure is reinstatement. I didn't notice whether or not this compact is also going to be doing reinstatement. I'm sorry, renewals. Is this compact going to be also handling renewals or it's just initial?
So the compact, the only thing the practitioner will need to do is renew their home state license. Um, so the compact really touches almost very little on the renewal process of the home state license. The state's renewal processes or continuing education won't change. But the only thing that changes is that the individual just has to, if I'm licensed to practice in 3 states, I hold a single state license in 3 different states. I have to meet the continuing education and renewal requirements of each of those 3 licenses. But with the compact, I just have to maintain 1 state license and 1 renewal period, while the privileges, which allow me to practice in other states, are their renewal process, the renewal timeline will correspond with the home state license.
Yeah, and Grant, to add to that, so for that license that you have in your home state, you go through the same process to renew that. The compact doesn't provide a process for you to renew the license through the compact, but you will be able to renew your compact privileges through the compact data system. So license would stay the same, you renew it the same way, just those privileges that you're receiving, you would renew that the compact website, paying for renewal fees, things of that nature.
Okay, so if you are okay, so if someone had Maryland was the home state and the person wanted to renew, they would renew through Maryland.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the group? We've been getting a lot of questions there in the chat. Helen.
Hi, do you guys anticipate, and I don't know how much you've looked at the state level, but there are some states without any CE requirements and some that have a large amount of them. Do you foresee that there may be resistance from states that have these CE requirements entering a compact with states that don't require any, and so therefore maybe allowing RTs to practice in their states who are not getting continuing education?
Yeah, I know we've convened licensing authorities from multiple states, and there seems now to not be a significant issue. That's a good point, and it's duly noted. I know there a handful of states which have much lower continuing education requirements than other states. So, like we said, that would be maintained through the compact. Have any other questions?
Grant, just to answer a few of these questions to chat that I haven't got a chance to type out here. So, one question about how the federal government may interplay with the compact and states' regulation, enforcement of control in the case of a situation if there's an emergency or anything like that. So, the compact preserves state sovereignty. That's one of the main purposes of the compact. So, just as states are controlling their scope of practice within their state, that's preserved. It would apply itself to the compact with the commission. The commission is, again, the government agency that is in charge of the compact and is comprised solely of compact member states. And this would be members from the licensing boards or administrators, each state sending a delegate. The authority of the commission is narrowly confined to what's allowed in the compact. They're not really able to touch things at all regarding scope of practice, or the initial licensure process, things of that nature, only as applies to what's narrowly confined in the compact. So in this case, the federal government would have no say or control as it pertains to the compact about issuing some kind of rule, at least through the compact. And then the other question we got was the fee that the state collects for privilege to practice, would it be renewed each time based on the home state renewals? Yes, that timeline would coincide with the license. So if it's every 2 years from your home state that you have to renew that license, it would be every 2 years that you would have to renew the compact privileges. And then, if it was 1 year, then for a home state renewal, then 1 year for the compact privileges. So that way you're not having to track different timelines, because feasibly you could at some point have 50 maybe compact privileges, and you wouldn't want to have to navigate and keep track of those. You want, one of the benefits of the compact is that can be streamlined.
I think we got a hand raised from Louise. Louise, do you got a hand raised? Got a question for us? Okay. Have any other questions from the group? Any more questions we weren't able to get in the chat?
Just seeing one more as a follow-up to one of the questions about who funds the National Center for Interstate Compacts. We are part of the Council of State Governments. CSG derives its funding from both, grants, contracts from organizations. We also get some dues from our member states as well. So our support is derived from different sources. For this project itself, the work is being funded by, at least for this first phase, the Department of Defense. Again, their interest here is that the compacts support military families, knowing that if you're, for example, a military spouse who's a respiratory therapist, and your spouse is having to relocate bases, that you may have to quickly find work in another state, and licensure could be a barrier to that and really negatively potentially impact the quality of life for that family. So that's where the interest is from the Department of Defense, to see states develop these compacts and to enact them, knowing that it improves the quality of life for military families.
And I just reiterate the point on that note, talking about the kind of the scope and power of the Compact Commission, that commission is made up of administrators of state licensing authorities. So the same people that administrate your license now in a state will oversee the compact and facilitate with the commission with no influence at the federal level once the commission's set up. So I think Louise had an issue with their speaker about travel RRTs, travel respiratory therapy, if that's still going to be available. And we've heard a lot of feedback from those in the profession that this will greatly enhance travel respiratory therapy. I know a lot of respiratory therapists have issues if they see a contract available they wish to apply for. They may have the availability and time and interest in applying for that contract, but one of the things that hold them back is that they won't be able to obtain licensure in enough time to fulfill that contract. So that a lot of travel respiratory therapists miss out on a lot of opportunities. We've seen through other compacts like the PT compact that uses a similar model, that licensure approval times for privileges is greatly lowered. Can usually happen at maximum within a day or a few days, with definitely within a week, which allows in the case that would be replicated with respiratory therapists, would really open a lot of doors for travel respiratory therapists and their ability to obtain contracts. Have any other questions? I know we're over time, but we can hang around for a few minutes if anyone else has any questions. Okay. Well, since I'm not seeing none, we'll go ahead and conclude today's meeting. I want to thank everyone for for joining us today. And we appreciate your interest and participation with the Respiratory Care Interstate Compact. And we'll be sending out an email update to the registrants soon with the link to the survey and to our website so you can review the language yourself and provide feedback on that. So I want to thank everyone for participating today and hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks.